Greetings, my friends. This is Celeria Rosenkreuz, and on this episode of the Chronological Quran, episode 7, we shall be continuing Surah 68, going from ayat 8 to 16. This one will be a little bit interesting, having more passages which directly flow into one another than any of the previous sets. So, without further ado, let us begin. Ayat 8 starts with, "So, do not give in to the deniers. Do not obey them. They wish you would compromise so that they would yield to you, for you to be pliant so that they too may be pliant." Here, like at the end of Surah 96, you have a command to not obey disbelievers over Allah, combined with an emphatic injunction against compromising on religious matters. Already then, this sets Islam up as a relatively hard-line religion. When an option to avoid the potential violence that has threatened to emerge in its wake appears, not only does it respond with mutual threats as in the previous surah, but beyond this, it also refuses to de-escalate and seek a mutually agreeable solution. This is the will of Allah demonstrated via said entity's words. We continue on with ayat 9, which begins, "And do not obey the despicable, vain oath-taker, the habitual swearer, halaf mahin, the scorner going about with malicious gossip, the detractor, spreader abroad of slanders, the hinderer of the good, the transgressor, the sinful, the brute, and on top of all that, an illegitimate child, mean and ignoble." Here we find Allah viciously denouncing one of Muhammad's greatest detractors, Al-Walid bin al-Mughira, saying that despite being the head of his house, he is illegitimate in his position, he is brutish and miserly, that he promotes evil by preventing good and going beyond the ethical boundaries which Allah instated for his own sake. The man pollutes his tongue by making his words worthless and frittering away his time in rumor-mongering. It is worth noting that this man is not only one of the wealthy and powerful men that Muhammad's ayat have been railing against from the beginning, but also, according to Ibn Ishaq, happens to have actively attempted to use any means to convince Muhammad's uncle, who is protecting him, that his nephew must be gotten rid of. For too much insult had been levied towards their gods, the traditions and beliefs of their people, and even their forefathers, for the men in power which Al-Mughira represented to accept him continuing on that path. Not everyone wanted to compromise, it would seem. Continuing on, we arrive at ayat 14, where it says, "Now, because he has been blessed with abundant wealth and sons, whenever our revelations are recited to him, he says ancient fables, legends from the men of old. We will soon mark his snout, branding him upon his ugly trunk." Now, ayat 14 simply identifies and confirms the previously established fact that this man was blessed with great wealth and blood, marking him as one of those men that Surah 96 refers to, who became content in their worldly possessions, and supposedly, as a result of this, reject Allah. The next two verses are a little more interesting, though. Ayat 15 suggests that people by this time were already talking about the Quran as having fables that were already known to people from hundreds of years ago, despite the fact that there should not have been any stories actually told in the Quran as of yet, if this were truly the second surah chronologically. As such, one must either assume that what would become the verses of multiple surah were being proclaimed alongside one another, rather than it being the case that the surah came one after another, or it is actually the case that the traditional chronology of the Quran is incorrect, and an alternative must be derived which properly places a surah where these stories are included before this one. Perhaps, for example, Ibn Kathir was correct in suggesting that the surah numbered 74 came before this one. Regardless, we shall continue to the end of this surah before switching over to that one, and then we shall see if it makes more sense to place it before Surah 68 in the chronology thereafter. As for ayat 16, Beyond the insult, this is seemingly the first example of prophecy featured in the Quran. The man who was being addressed would indeed be branded insofar as his nose would be cleaved off, which in ancient cultures was considered such a shame that it would disqualify a person for kingship, and in some cases would reportedly cause a person to have a worse experience in the afterlife. A missing nose is such a grotesquerie historically that it is in the same category as gouging one's eyes out, or castrating a person. Something that fundamentally changes the person's status and how they are treated by the community. Truly, this is a dreadful curse. With that, we have reached the end of our reading for today. As such, I shall see you next time. This has been Celeria Rosenkreuz, and I bid you farewell.